You'll die alone, Madison. No man will ever want someone like you. Those words echoed in my mind as I stood in the mirror, adjusting my wedding dress for the final fitting. What my family didn't know was that while they were busy writing me off as the eternal spinster, my fiancé was secretly coordinating with Italian architects to design our dream wedding venue from scratch. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The whole thing started 3 years ago at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle. I was 28, working as a freelance graphic designer, and honestly, I'd given up on dating. My last relationship had ended with him telling me I was too career-focused and not wife material. My mother had a field day with that breakup, reminding me weekly that my biological clock was ticking louder than Big Ben. That Tuesday morning, I was hunched over my laptop, desperately trying to finish a logo design for a client who kept changing their mind. The coffee shop was packed, and I was occupying a table meant for 4 people with my mess of sketches, color swatches, and empty coffee cups. I felt someone approach my table. "Excuse me, would you mind if I borrowed one of these chairs?" "Everywhere else is taken." I looked up to see a guy about my age, dark hair, wearing a simple gray sweater and jeans. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed money. He had kind eyes and seemed genuinely apologetic for interrupting my creative chaos. "Sure, go ahead," I said, quickly gathering some of my papers. "Sorry about the mess. I'm basically running a one-woman design studio out of this corner." He smiled. "No worries. I'm actually impressed by the organization. I'm Ethan, by the way." "Ethan Crawford. Madison Torres," I replied, shaking his outstretched hand. What followed was the most natural conversation I'd had in years. Ethan was curious about my work, asking thoughtful questions about the design process. He mentioned he worked in consulting, which I assumed meant he was probably another tech guy in Seattle's endless supply of tech guys. We talked for 2 hours before I realized I'd completely forgotten about my deadline. Over the next few weeks, we kept running into each other at the same coffee shop. It started feeling less like coincidence and more like fate. Our conversations flowed effortlessly. He was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly down to earth. Unlike the guys I'd dated before, Ethan actually listened when I talked about my dreams of starting my own design agency. Our first official date was a disaster, but in the best possible way. Ethan had planned this elaborate evening at a fancy restaurant downtown, but the reservation got mixed up, and we ended up at a 24-hour diner instead. We spent 4 hours talking over terrible coffee and surprisingly good pie. He walked me to my car, and when he kissed me goodnight, I felt something I'd never experienced before, complete certainty that this was right. The relationship progressed naturally. Ethan was attentive without being clingy, supportive without being controlling. He celebrated my small victories like landing a new client, and he was there during my moments of self-doubt. What struck me most was how he never once made me feel like I needed to change anything about myself. My family's reaction to Ethan was predictably lukewarm. My mother, Patricia, sized him up during our first family dinner with the precision of a jeweler examining a questionable diamond. "He seems nice enough," she said afterward, which in Patricia speak meant, "I'm already planning your next breakup." My sister Carmen was more direct. "He's cute, Madison, but what does he actually do? Consulting could mean anything. You need someone stable, someone who can provide for a family." My father mostly stayed out of these conversations, but I caught him studying Ethan during family gatherings, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Dad had always been protective, maybe because I was his youngest, or maybe because he'd watched me get hurt before. The comments from my family weren't malicious, but they were constant. Every family gathering included subtle digs about my relationship, status, my age, my career choices. "Carmen's engagement photos turned out beautiful," my aunt would say, then turned to me with a pitying smile. Don't worry, honey. The right person will come along eventually. What they didn't know was that the right person had already come along, and he was nothing like what they expected. Ethan and I had been together for about 8 months when I started noticing little things that didn't quite add up. His apartment was nice, really nice, but he always described it as just a rental. He drove a modest Honda, but it was always perfectly maintained. When we went out, he never seemed worried about money, but he also never flaunted it. The first real clue came when we were walking through Pike Place Market on a Saturday morning. We stopped at a small art booth where a local artist was selling paintings. I was admiring a landscape of the Olympic Mountains when the artist recognized Ethan. "Mr. Crawford, I didn't expect to see you here. How's the foundation doing?" Ethan looked slightly uncomfortable. "Everything's going well, thanks. Actually, I'd love you to meet Madison. Madison, this is Sarah Chen. She's one of the most talented artists in the city." Sarah beamed at me. "Any friend of Ethan's is a friend of mine. He's been such a supporter of local artists. The grant program he set up has been a lifesaver for so many of us." After we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. "Grant program?" I asked. Ethan shrugged. "Just something I help coordinate through work. It's not a big deal." But it felt like a big deal. The way Sarah had looked at him, the way she'd said his name, there was respect there. The kind of respect reserved for people who make real differences in other people's lives. I started paying more attention after that. The way restaurant staff treated him with unusual deference. The fact that his consulting work seemed to involve a lot of international calls at odd hours. The expensive watch he wore but never talked about. The way he seemed to know everyone in the city's business community. Then came the night that changed everything. We'd been dating for almost a year when Ethan asked me to accompany him to a charity gala. "It's for work," he explained. "I know, these things can be boring, but it would mean a lot to me if you were there." I bought a dress I couldn't really afford and spent more on hair and makeup than I had in months. When Ethan picked me up, wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo, I realized this wasn't going to be the casual work event I'd imagined. The gala was held at the Seattle Art Museum, and from the moment we walked in, I knew I was out of my league. This wasn't just a fundraiser. This was the kind of event where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen. The guest list read like a who's who of Seattle's most influential people. What shocked me wasn't the opulence of the event, but how Ethan navigated it. People approached him constantly, and not just to make small talk. They sought his opinion, his advice, his approval. I watched him move through the crowd with an ease that spoke of familiarity, of belonging. The moment of truth came when the evening's host took the stage to thank the major donors. "We're especially grateful to the Crawford Foundation for their continued support. Ethan Crawford's vision and generosity have made tonight possible." The spotlight found us at our table, and Ethan stood to acknowledge the applause. I sat there, stunned as the pieces finally clicked into place. The man I'd been dating for almost a year, the man who split coffee shop bills with me and drove a Honda Civic, was apparently one of Seattle's major philanthropists. As we left the gala that night, my mind was racing. "Were you ever going to tell me?" I asked as we sat in his car. "Tell you what?" "About who you really are. About the money, the foundation, all of it." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I was waiting for the right time. I wanted you to know me, the real me, before you knew about the rest of it. And you didn't think I could handle the truth?" "It's not that," he said, turning to face me. "Madison, you're the first person who's ever looked at me and seen just me. Not my net worth, not what I could do for them, not some opportunity to climb the social ladder. You fell in love with a guy who drinks too much coffee and argues with you about font choices. I didn't want to lose that. I understood what he meant, but it still stung. So, what happens now?" "Now we figure it out together," he said, reaching for my hand. "If you want to." That conversation was the beginning of our real relationship. Over the following months, Ethan gradually opened up about his life, his family's business empire, and the responsibility he felt to use his wealth meaningfully. I learned about the pressure he'd felt growing up, the relationships that had failed because people couldn't see past his bank account, the loneliness that came with never knowing if someone's feelings were genuine. My family's skepticism about Ethan began to shift, but not in the way I expected. Instead of being impressed by his wealth, they became more suspicious. "What does a billionaire want with our Madison?" my mother wondered aloud. There has to be a catch. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, they'd criticized my choices in men, claiming I was too picky, too career-focused, too this or too that. Now that I'd found someone who loved and supported me completely, they were convinced there had to be something wrong with him. The real test came during a family barbecue that summer. Ethan had offered to host it at his actual house, a stunning waterfront property in Medina that he'd been hiding from me for over a year. My family arrived with their guard up, ready to find fault with everything. But Ethan was brilliant. He didn't try to impress them or show off his wealth. Instead, he spent the afternoon grilling burgers, playing catch with my nephew, and listening to my father's endless stories about his construction work. By the end of the day, even my skeptical mother was charmed. That night, as we cleaned up together, Ethan turned to me with a serious expression. "Madison, there's something I need to ask you." My heart stopped. The way he said it, the tone in his voice. I knew this wasn't going to be a casual question about weekend plans. "What is it?" I asked, setting down the plate I'd been drying. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught in my throat. "Madison Torres, you've changed my entire world. You saw me when I was just a guy in a coffee shop, and you loved me before you knew anything else about me. Will you marry me?" The ring was stunning but not ostentatious, a classic solitaire that caught the light perfectly. It was exactly what I would have chosen for myself, which meant he'd been paying attention to details I didn't even know I'd shared. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "Yes," I whispered, and then louder. "Yes, of course." The engagement period should have been the happiest time of my life, and in many ways it was. But it also brought out the worst in some people I thought I knew. My family's reaction was a masterclass in mixed emotions. My mother oscillated between excitement about planning a wedding and anxiety about whether this was all too good to be true. "These rich men, Madison," she warned during one of our wedding planning sessions, "they have different rules. What if he gets bored? What if this is just some phase?" Carmen's response was perhaps the most telling. "I'm happy for you," she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's just, don't you think it's a little suspicious? A billionaire who wants to marry someone so ordinary?" The word hit me like a slap. Ordinary. That's how my own sister saw me. But the real drama came from people I hadn't expected. Friends from college suddenly started reaching out after years of silence, all wanting to reconnect and catch up. Acquaintances began treating me differently, with a mix of newfound respect and barely concealed envy. The worst part was the assumptions. People assumed I was a gold digger, that I'd somehow tricked or manipulated Ethan into proposing. The whispers at social events were barely concealed. "She must be pregnant," or "he'll figure it out eventually," or my personal favorite, "She's pretty enough, I guess. But what does she really bring to the table?" Ethan noticed the change in how people treated me, and it bothered him more than it bothered me. "We could elope," he suggested one evening, after a particularly brutal charity dinner where several women had made pointed comments about my dress, my background, and my suitability as a partner for someone in his position. "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "I'm not going to let them win by hiding. We're going to have the wedding we want, and everyone who has something to say about it can deal with it." That's when Ethan got that look in his eyes, the same look he got when he was planning a major business acquisition, or setting up a new charitable initiative. You know what? You're absolutely right. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. What I didn't know was that properly in Ethan's world meant something entirely different than what I'd imagined. The wedding planning process revealed just how different our worlds really were. When I suggested looking at venues in Seattle, Ethan nodded politely but seemed distracted. When I showed him pictures of local churches and gardens, he made appropriate noises but didn't seem engaged. "Is everything okay?" I asked after he'd given a lukewarm response to what I thought was a beautiful vineyard venue. "You seem, I don't know, not excited about any of these places." Ethan set down the venue brochures and took my hand. "Madison, I need to tell you something. I've been working on a surprise, but I think I need to let you in on it." He pulled out his laptop and opened a folder filled with architectural drawings, photographs, and what looked like construction plans. "I've been working with a team in Italy for the past 6 months. There's this property in Tuscany. It's been in ruins for decades, but it has the most incredible bones. Rolling hills, olive groves, a view that goes on forever." He clicked through images of a crumbling villa perched on a hillside, surrounded by cypress trees and overgrown gardens. Even in its neglected state, it was breathtaking. "I bought it," he continued, "and I've been having it restored. Not just restored, completely reimagined. I wanted to create the perfect place for us to start our marriage, somewhere that would be ours alone." I stared at the screen, trying to process what he was telling me. "You bought a villa in Italy? For our wedding?" "The construction should be finished next month. The gardens are being redesigned by the same landscape architect who worked on the grounds at Villa San Martino. The ceremony space will overlook the valley, and there's going to be a reception terrace that can accommodate 200 guests. 200 guests. I'd been thinking about a wedding for 50 people at most. Ethan, this is incredible, but it's huge. My family can't afford to travel to Italy. Most of my friends can't either. And honestly, I'm not sure I want a wedding for 200 people." "That's all taken care of," he said quickly. "Flight arrangements, accommodations, everything. Anyone we want to invite will be able to come. As for the guest list, it's entirely up to you. I have business associates and family friends who'll expect invitations, but the people who matter most are the ones you choose." I looked at the drawings. Again, the elegant architecture, the sweeping terraces, the romantic garden paths. It was like something out of a fairy tale, but it was also overwhelming. "Can I see it?" I asked. "Before we commit to this, can we go there together?" Ethan's face lit up. "I was hoping you'd ask. How does next weekend sound?" The flight to Italy was my first experience with truly private luxury. Ethan had chartered a jet, and the level of service was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. But what struck me most was how normal he made it all seem, as if flying in a private plane was just another way to get from point A to point B. When we landed in Florence, a driver was waiting to take us to the property. The drive through the Tuscan countryside was like moving through a painting, endless rolling hills covered in vineyards and olive groves, medieval towns perched on hilltops, cypress trees standing like sentinels along winding roads. Then we turned onto a private road, climbed through gates that looked like they belonged to a castle, and there it was. The villa took my breath away. What had looked charming, but modest in the architectural drawings, was actually a sprawling masterpiece. The main building was 3 stories of honey-colored stone, with perfectly proportioned windows and a terrace that seemed to float above the valley below. The gardens cascaded down the hillside in terraced sections, each one more beautiful than the last. "Ethan," I whispered, "this isn't a wedding venue. This is a palace." He wrapped his arms around me from behind as we stood on the main terrace. "It's our palace, if you want it to be. But Madison, if this is too much, if you'd rather have something smaller and simpler, we can do that instead. I got carried away because I wanted to give you something perfect, but perfect for you might be completely different than this." I turned in his arms and looked at his face. There was vulnerability there, uncertainty about whether he'd overstepped. This man who could buy anything, who could make anything happen, was worried that he'd made the wrong choice. "It's beautiful," I said honestly. "It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen. But Ethan, when I imagine our wedding, I don't see all this grandeur. I see us and the people we love, celebrating something real and meaningful. Can we do that here?" "We can do whatever you want," he said. "The venue is just the backdrop. What matters is that at the end of the day, you'll be my wife." Over the next few days, we worked with the wedding planner Ethan had hired, a sophisticated Italian woman named Francesca, who spoke 5 languages and had apparently coordinated weddings for European royalty. Together, we scaled back some of the more elaborate elements while keeping the essential beauty of the setting. The ceremony would be intimate, held in the villa's restored chapel with only our closest family and friends. The reception would be on the main terrace, with dinner served family-style at long wooden tables under string lights and the Tuscan stars. As we finalized the details, I felt a growing excitement. This wasn't just going to be a wedding. It was going to be a celebration that perfectly represented who we were as a couple. Elegant but not pretentious. Beautiful but not showy. Intimate but not small-minded. When we returned to Seattle, I was glowing with excitement about sharing the news with my family. I couldn't wait to tell them about the villa, about the plans we'd made, about how magical it was all going to be. I should have known better. My mother's first question wasn't about the venue or the ceremony. It was, how much is this costing him? And more importantly, what does he expect in return? The conversation went downhill from there. Carmen wondered aloud if I was getting in over my head with all this luxury. My father worried about the message we were sending, about whether I was losing touch with my roots. But the comment that hurt the most came from my Aunt Rosa, who'd always been like a second mother to me. "Mija," she said, shaking her head sadly, "you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Men like him don't marry girls like us for love. There's always an agenda." That night, I called Ethan in tears. "Maybe we should just elope after all," I said. "My own family thinks I'm making a mistake." "Madison," he said gently, "your family loves you. They're just scared because this is all new and overwhelming. But sweetheart, we're not getting married to them. We're getting married." He was right, but that didn't make the criticism any easier to bear, especially when it was coming from the people whose approval I'd always craved. The weeks leading up to the wedding became a balancing act between managing my family's concerns and dealing with an entirely different set of challenges I hadn't anticipated. Word had somehow gotten out in Seattle's social circles about our Italian villa wedding, and suddenly everyone had opinions. The first real shock came when I opened my email one morning to find a message from someone calling themselves a concerned friend. The anonymous sender had attached links to gossip blogs and social media posts, speculating about our relationship. The headlines were brutal: "Tech heiress or gold digger," and "The Cinderella story that seems too good to be true." I stared at my laptop screen, reading strangers dissecting my relationship, my motives, even my appearance. They'd somehow gotten hold of photos from the charity gala and were analyzing everything from my dress to my body language, looking for signs that I was playing a role or in it for the money. When I showed Ethan the articles, his jaw tightened in a way I'd never seen before. "I'm calling my lawyer," he said immediately. "No," I said, closing the laptop. "That'll just make it worse. These people want a reaction. If we ignore them, they'll move on to the next story." But ignoring them became increasingly difficult as the speculation spread. I started getting strange looks at the grocery store. My usual coffee shop felt uncomfortable because I couldn't shake the feeling that people were whispering about me. Even my mail carrier seemed to regard me with new curiosity. The breaking point came during a fitting for my wedding dress. I'd chosen a local boutique owned by a woman named Helen, who'd been designing dresses for Seattle brides for 30 years. She was known for her discretion and professionalism, which is why I was completely unprepared for what happened. I was standing in front of the mirror, making final adjustments to the dress, when Helen's assistant made a comment that stopped me cold. "You know," she said while pinning the hem, "I've been following your story online. It's so romantic, but I have to ask, weren't you nervous about signing a prenup? I mean, with that much money involved?" I stared at her reflection in the mirror. "I'm sorry, what?" Helen stepped in quickly. "Jessica, that's completely inappropriate. Please focus on your work." But the damage was done. The assumption that there must be a prenup, that there must be some financial arrangement underlying our relationship, hit me harder than all the anonymous blog posts combined. This wasn't coming from strangers on the internet. This was coming from someone who was supposed to be helping me prepare for my wedding day. That evening, I brought up the prenup question with Ethan. We'd never discussed it, and honestly, it had never occurred to me that we should. "Do you want one?" he asked, looking genuinely confused by the question. "I don't know," I admitted. "Everyone seems to assume we have one. Maybe we should?" Ethan set down the book he'd been reading and gave me his full attention. "Madison, if you want legal protection, we can absolutely arrange that. But I need you to know that I've never once thought about protecting my money from you. You're going to be my wife. What's mine is yours, completely." His certainty was both reassuring and overwhelming. "But what if something goes wrong? What if we get divorced?" "Then we'll figure it out like two adults who once loved each other enough to get married," he said simply. "I'm not going into this marriage planning for it to fail." The conversation should have put my mind at ease, but instead it highlighted how unprepared I was for the reality of marrying someone with significant wealth. There were legal implications, tax considerations, and social expectations that I'd never had to think about before. 3 weeks before the wedding, my maid of honor, my college roommate Sarah, threw me a bachelorette party that became another minefield of awkward moments. She'd invited 12 women, including some friends I hadn't seen in years, and a few I wasn't particularly close to. The evening started at a trendy restaurant, and everything was fine until the champagne started flowing and the questions began. "So, Madison," said a woman named Jennifer who I'd worked with briefly 2 years earlier, "what's it like dating someone so wealthy? Do you just buy whatever you want now?" "It's not like that," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Our relationship isn't about money." "But come on," pressed another woman. "You have to admit your life has changed. Designer clothes, private jets, that incredible ring." I looked down at my engagement ring and realized that to them, it wasn't a symbol of love, it was a price tag. Every gift Ethan had given me, every nice dinner we'd shared, every thoughtful gesture was being reduced to its monetary value. The night got worse when someone suggested we go to an expensive club downtown. "Madison's treating," one of them announced, and suddenly I was expected to pick up a tab for 12 people at one of Seattle's most exclusive venues. I ended up spending more that night than I usually spent in 3 months, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't figure out how to say no without seeming cheap or ungrateful for my circumstances. Sarah, bless her heart, sensed my discomfort and ended the evening early. As we waited for our Ubers, she pulled me aside. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't realize people would be so focused on the money aspect. I just wanted to give you a fun night." "It's not your fault," I assured her, but the damage was done. I went home feeling more isolated than ever. The isolation deepened when I tried to talk to my family about what I was experiencing. My mother's response was predictably unhelpful. "Well, Mia, this is what you signed up for. Rich people live in a different world." Carmen was more direct. "Maybe you should postpone the wedding. Give yourself time to think about whether you're really ready for all this." Even my father, usually my strongest supporter, seemed uncertain. Madison, you know I love you and I want you to be happy. But are you sure this is what you want? All this attention, all these expectations? Their doubt was crushing because part of me was starting to wonder the same thing. Was I really ready for a life where every decision would be scrutinized, where my motives would constantly be questioned, where my worth would be measured against my husband's bank account? The crisis came 10 days before the wedding. I was at home, finalizing the seating chart for the reception, when I got a call from Francesca, our wedding planner in Italy. "Madison, darling, we have a small situation," she said in her elegant accent. "There's been some media attention about the wedding. A few photographers have been spotted near the villa, and I'm concerned about privacy." My stomach dropped. "What kind of media attention?" "Nothing too serious, but there are rumors circulating in the European press about the wedding. Some speculation about costs, guest lists, that sort of thing. Ethan's security team is handling it, but I wanted you to be aware." After I hung up, I sat in my empty apartment feeling completely overwhelmed. In trying to create our perfect wedding, we'd somehow created a spectacle. The intimate ceremony I'd imagined was turning into a media event. I called Ethan at his office, something I rarely did during business hours. "Can you come home?" I asked, not bothering to hide the tears in my voice. He was there within 20 minutes, still wearing his suit from whatever meeting he'd walked out of. "What's wrong?" he asked, pulling me into his arms. "I don't know if I can do this," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. The attention, the speculation, the way everyone's treating me differently. I feel like I'm losing myself. Ethan held me tighter. "Tell me what you need." "I need to know that you'll still love me if I'm not good at being rich," I said finally, voicing my deepest fear. "I need to know that when people say I'm not good enough for you, you won't start believing them." He pulled back to look at me, his expression serious. "Madison Torres, you are the strongest, most genuine person I've ever met. You've handled everything that's been thrown at you with more grace than I could have managed. Anyone who thinks you're not good enough for me has it completely backwards. But what if they're right? What if I can't handle your world?" "Then we'll change my world," he said without hesitation. "Madison, I fell in love with you, not with the idea of molding you into someone else. If my money and my lifestyle are making you unhappy, then we'll figure out a different way to live." That conversation was the turning point. We spent the next several hours talking about our fears, our expectations, and our non-negotiables. We decided that after the wedding, we'd take a step back from the social obligations that came with Ethan's wealth and focus on building a life that felt authentic to both of us. But first, we had a wedding to get through. And despite all the chaos surrounding it, I was determined to make it the celebration of love we'd originally envisioned. The week before the wedding, Ethan surprised me with something I hadn't expected: a complete media blackout plan. "I've hired a security firm that specializes in privacy protection," he explained as we sat in his home office, surrounded by documents and travel itineraries. "No phones with cameras allowed at the venue, professional security at all access, points, and a decoy event at a different location to throw off any unwanted attention." I stared at him. "You're talking about our wedding like it's a witness protection program." "I'm talking about our wedding like it's the most important day of our lives, and I want nothing to interfere with that," he said firmly. "Madison, I've been thinking about what you said, about feeling like you're losing yourself. Part of that is because our private life has become public entertainment. After this weekend, we're taking control back." The plan was more elaborate than I'd realized. Guests would receive their actual travel details only 48 hours before departure. Everyone would sign confidentiality agreements, not because we didn't trust them, but because it would protect them from being pressured by media outlets for information. The Italian security team had already swept the villa and surrounding areas. "This feels so cloak and dagger," I said, looking through the guest communications plan. This feels necessary, Ethan replied. I should have handled this better from the beginning. I'm sorry you've had to deal with any of this. 2 days. Before we were scheduled to leave for Italy, my family gathered for what was supposed to be a small farewell dinner. The atmosphere was tense from the moment everyone arrived. My mother had been unusually quiet during the meal, pushing food around her plate instead of eating. Finally, she set down her fork and looked directly at me. Madison, I need to say something, and I need you to listen. The table went silent. Even my nephew stopped playing with his toy airplane. I've been watching you these past few months, she continued, and you're not yourself. You're stressed, you're anxious, you're constantly worried about what people think. This isn't what love is supposed to look like. Mom? I started, but she held up her hand. I'm not finished. I know we've had our concerns about Ethan, and maybe some of those concerns were unfair. But what I'm seeing now isn't about him. It's about you losing who you are to become who you think you need to be. Carmen nodded in agreement. She's right, Madison. You used to be so confident, so sure of yourself. Now you second-guess everything. My father, who had been quiet through most of these family discussions, finally spoke up. Mija, your mother and sister aren't wrong, but they're not completely right either. Growing into a new life is always uncomfortable. The question is whether you're growing into someone you want to be or someone you think you should be. The conversation continued for another hour, with everyone sharing their observations and concerns. By the end, I felt emotionally drained, but also oddly relieved. At least everything was out in the open now. That night, I called Ethan and recounted the entire dinner conversation. Do you think they're right? He asked when I finished. I think they're partially right, I admitted. I have been trying to be someone I'm not, but it's not because of you. It's because of everyone else's expectations. So, what do you want to do? I want to marry you, I said without hesitation. And then I want us to figure out how to be ourselves, regardless of what anyone else thinks. The flight to Italy was surreal. Ethan had chartered a larger plane to accommodate both of our families and the wedding party. Watching my parents experience private jet travel for the first time was both amusing and touching. My father kept marveling at the craftsmanship of the interior, while my mother worried about whether it was appropriate to accept such extravagance. But somewhere over the Atlantic, the mood shifted. Maybe it was the champagne, or maybe it was the reality that we were actually doing this, but people started to relax. My mother began chatting with Ethan's parents about wedding traditions. Carmen and Ethan's sister discovered they both loved the same obscure Netflix series. Even my skeptical Aunt Rosa found herself laughing at one of Ethan's father's stories. When we landed in Florence, I watched my family's faces as they saw the Italian countryside for the first time. The rolling hills, the cypress trees, the medieval towns perched on hilltops. It was like stepping into a postcard. For a moment, I forgot about all the stress and drama and just felt grateful that we could share this experience with the people we loved. The villa looked even more spectacular than I remembered. The restoration had been completed to perfection, and Francesca had outdone herself with the decorations. White flowers cascaded from every balcony, string lights created a canopy of stars over the terrace, and the chapel had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. But the real magic happened during the rehearsal dinner. Instead of the formal affair I'd been dreading, it turned into an evening of genuine connection. Ethan's business associates mingled easily with my college friends. My father spent an hour talking about construction techniques with the architect who'd overseen the villa restoration. My mother and Ethan's mother discovered a shared passion for gardening. Sarah, my maid of honor, pulled me aside during dessert. Madison, I owe you an apology. For what? For letting that bachelorette party get so weird and uncomfortable? I should have shut down those questions about money. I was so focused on throwing you a proper party that I forgot what you actually needed, just time with people who care about you. It's okay. I said, squeezing her hand. Everything's been a learning experience. You seem different tonight, she observed. More relaxed, more like yourself. She was right. Surrounded by the people who mattered most in this beautiful place that Ethan had created for us, I finally felt like I could breathe again. The morning of the wedding dawned perfect. Clear skies, gentle breeze, temperatures in the mid-70s. I woke up in my suite overlooking the valley and felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. My mother, Carmen, and Sarah helped me get ready, and for the first time in our recent family interactions, there was no tension. My mother carefully arranged my veil, Carmen fixed my makeup when I teared up, and Sarah made sure every detail was perfect. You look beautiful, mija, my mother said, stepping back to admire the finished result. But more importantly, you look happy. Bow. Ceremony itself was everything we'd hoped for. The chapel was filled with warm light filtering through stained glass windows. The music was provided by a string quartet we'd found in Florence. And when I walked down the aisle with my father, seeing Ethan's face as he watched me approach, everything else faded away. The vows we'd written ourselves were simple but heartfelt. Ethan promised to love me exactly as I was, without trying to change me or mold me into someone else. I promised to trust in our love, even when the outside world tried to define us by things that didn't matter. When the priest pronounced us husband and wife, the small chapel erupted in applause and cheers. But in that moment, I was only aware of Ethan's hands holding mine and the absolute certainty that we'd made the right choice. The reception on the terrace was magical. We'd kept it intimate, just 40 guests, and the atmosphere was relaxed and joyful. Instead of formal speeches, people shared spontaneous toasts throughout the evening. My father's voice broke as he talked about watching his youngest daughter find her happiness. Ethan's best man told embarrassing stories from their college days. Even my Aunt Rosa raised her glass to say that maybe she'd been wrong about rich men. But the moment that meant the most to me came near the end of the evening. I was standing at the edge of the terrace looking out over the valley when Ethan joined me. Any regrets? He asked, slipping his arms around me from behind. Just one, I said, leaning back against him. What's that? I wish we'd done this sooner. He laughed and spun me around to face him. Mrs. Crawford, we have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time. As we danced to our last song of the evening, under the Tuscan stars with our families and friends surrounding us, I realized something important. All the drama, all the speculation, all the outside pressure, none of it had touched what really mattered. At the end of the day, we were just two people who loved each other, surrounded by people who loved us. The fairy tale wasn't the money or the villa or the perfect wedding. The fairy tale was finding someone who saw me exactly as I was and loved me completely. The honeymoon period after our wedding, both literally and figuratively, lasted exactly 3 weeks. We'd decided to stay in Italy for an extended honeymoon, renting a small cottage in a village near Siena where nobody knew who we were. For 21 blissful days, we lived like ordinary newlyweds. We explored local markets, took cooking classes from an elderly Italian woman named Nonna Maria, and spent lazy afternoons reading in olive groves. It was during this time that I truly understood what Ethan had meant about wanting me to know him before knowing about his wealth. The man who haggled over tomatoes at the village market and got genuinely excited about learning to make fresh pasta was the same person I'd fallen in love with in that Seattle coffee shop. But reality has a way of reasserting itself. The first sign that our bubble was about to burst came in the form of a text from Ethan's assistant. Urgent. Please call when possible. Media situation developing. We were sitting on the terrace of a small restaurant, sharing a bottle of local wine and planning the next day's adventure to a nearby monastery. The text immediately changed the atmosphere. What kind of media situation? I asked as Ethan dialed his office. The conversation that followed was conducted mostly in business jargon, but I caught enough to understand the basics. Someone had leaked details about our wedding. Not just that it had happened, but specifics. About the venue, the cost of the restoration, even details about the guest list and security measures. "How bad is it?" I asked when he hung up. "Bad enough," Ethan said grimly. "There are articles running in 3 countries speculating about how much we spent. Someone calculated the cost down to the flowers and published it online." That night, against my better judgment, I searched for news about our wedding. What I found made me sick to my stomach. Our private celebration had been turned into a vulgar display of wealth. Publications were calling it the most expensive wedding of the year and speculating about everything from my dress designer to the champagne selection. But worse than the financial speculation were the personal attacks. Comment sections were filled with people who'd never met me calling me a gold digger, criticizing my appearance, even questioning whether I was worthy of such an expensive celebration. One particularly cruel article included side-by-side photos of me at the wedding and at casual events, with commentary about how I'd transformed myself to fit into high society. "Don't read that garbage," Ethan said, finding me at 2 a.m. scrolling through increasingly vicious commentary on my laptop. "I can't help it," I admitted. "It's like watching a car accident. I know I should look away, but I can't." "Madison, these people don't know you. They don't know us. Their opinions literally don't matter." "But they feel like they matter," I said, closing the laptop. "And what if they influence people who do matter? What if this affects your business relationships? What if we stop letting hypothetical scenarios control our happiness?" He interrupted gently. "What if we focus on the fact that we just had the most amazing 3 weeks of our lives?" He was right, but the damage was done. The magic of our Italian retreat had been broken, and I could feel my anxiety creeping back. When we returned to Seattle, the culture shock was immediate and intense. Our absence had apparently made the story even bigger. Local news stations had run segments about the Cinderella wedding, complete with interviews with people who claimed to know me, but whom I'd never met. My neighbor in my old apartment building stopped me in the lobby. "Madison, I saw you on the news. How exciting. I always knew you'd marry rich someday." The comment was meant as a compliment, but it stung. Had people always seen me as someone who would marry rich? Has my worth always been measured by my potential to attract wealth? Moving into Ethan's house, our house now, presented its own challenges. The place was beautiful, but it felt enormous after my cozy apartment. The staff was professional and discreet, but having people clean, cook, and manage household details felt strange to someone who'd been doing everything herself for years. The hardest adjustment was the constant low-level attention. Photographers occasionally lingered outside the gates. Social invitations arrived daily from people I'd never heard of. Charity organizations bombarded me with requests for endorsements and appearances. "It'll calm down," Ethan assured me. "These things always do. People will find something else to talk about." But 6 weeks later, the attention hadn't diminished. If anything, it had evolved. I was now being invited to join charity boards, to chair fundraising committees, to become the face of various causes. While the work itself was meaningful, the motivation behind many of these invitations was transparently about accessing Ethan's wealth and connections. The breaking point came during a luncheon for the Seattle Children's Hospital Foundation. I'd agreed to attend because I genuinely cared about the cause, but it quickly became clear that I was there more as a trophy than a contributor. "Mrs. Crawford," gushed the foundation's director, "we're so thrilled to have you here. Your husband's foundation has been such a supporter, and we're hoping you might consider joining our board." "I'd be interested in learning more about the work you do," I replied carefully. "Oh, we're not expecting you to do any actual work," she laughed. "Your name on our letterhead would be enough contribution. And of course, any influence you might have over your husband's charitable giving decisions would be invaluable." I excused myself and called Ethan from the parking lot. I can't do this, I said without preamble. I can't be a professional wife whose only value is her access to money. That evening, we had the most serious conversation of our marriage. I told Ethan about feeling like I was losing my identity, about how every interaction now seemed to be filtered through the lens of his wealth. I talked about missing my work, my independence, my sense of purpose. "So what do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to go back to work," I said. "Real work. I want to rebuild my design business, but I want to do it right this time. Not as the billionaire's wife who's playing at having a career, but as someone who's genuinely contributing something valuable." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "What would that look like?" "I've been thinking about starting a design firm that specializes in helping nonprofits and small businesses create professional branding they can actually afford. Use my skills to help organizations that are making a real difference, but don't have big marketing budgets." "That sounds incredible," he said, and I could hear the genuine enthusiasm in his voice. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to let me do this independently. No financial backing from you, no using your connections. To get clients, no leveraging your name to open doors. If I succeed, I want it to be because I earned it. And if you need help, then I'll ask for it. But Ethan, I need to know that I can still be successful on my own merits. I need to know that I haven't lost that part of myself." 3 months later, I launched Torres Design Studio. I rented a small office in Capitol Hill, nowhere near the financial district where people might connect me to Ethan's business world. I used my maiden name professionally and deliberately kept my client meetings away from venues where I might run into people from our social circle. The early days were challenging in ways I hadn't expected. After months of being deferred because of my marriage, it was jarring to have potential clients scrutinize my portfolio and question my rates. But it was also exhilarating. Every client I landed, every project I completed successfully, every positive review I received felt like a small victory for my independence. 6 months into the business, I got a call that changed everything. The Seattle Children's Hospital Foundation, the same organization whose luncheon had triggered my career crisis, wanted to hire me to redesign their marketing materials. "We've seen your work with other nonprofits," the program director explained. "Your approach to affordable, effective design is exactly what we need. We'd like to propose a 6-month contract." I accepted the project, but with one condition. They had to agree that my work would be evaluated solely on its merits, not on any connection to my personal life. The project was one of the most satisfying of my career. I created a complete brand, Refresh, that increased their donation response rates by 40% and helped them launch their most successful fundraising campaign in years. When they offered me a permanent consulting role, I knew I'd found my way back to myself. The night I signed the contract, Ethan took me out to celebrate, not to some expensive restaurant where we'd be seen and photographed, but to the same little diner where we'd had our first real date. "I'm proud of you," he said over terrible coffee and surprisingly good pie. "Not because you succeeded, but because you fought to become yourself again. I couldn't have done it without you letting me," I replied. "Madison, you didn't need my permission to be extraordinary. You just needed to remember that you already were." Looking back on that first year of marriage, I realized that the real challenge hadn't been learning to live with wealth. It had been learning to maintain my identity while everyone around me tried to redefine me by my circumstances. The fairy tale wasn't about marrying a billionaire. It was about finding someone who loved me enough to let me figure out who I wanted to be, even when that journey was messy and uncertain. 2 years into our marriage, just when I thought we'd found our rhythm, life threw us a curveball that changed everything. I was in my office at Torres Design Studio, working on a campaign for a local animal shelter, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's number, but her voice sounded strange, shaky and uncertain. "Madison, I need you to come home right away." "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately closing my laptop. "It's your father. He collapsed at work. We're at Harborview Medical Center." The drive to the hospital was a blur. Ethan met me there, having somehow arranged to leave his own meetings the moment I called him. We found my mother and Carmen in the cardiac unit waiting room, both looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen them. The next few hours were a whirlwind of medical consultations, insurance paperwork, and difficult decisions. My father had suffered a massive heart attack and needed immediate surgery. The procedure would be expensive, and while his construction company provided insurance, it wasn't going to cover everything. "Don't worry about the money," Ethan said, quietly to my mother. "Whatever isn't covered, we'll handle it." I expected my mother to protest, to insist on independence the way she always had. Instead, she simply nodded and said, "Thank you." That moment marked the beginning of a shift in my family's relationship with our circumstances. For the first time, Ethan's wealth wasn't a source of tension or suspicion. It was a tool that could genuinely help the people we loved. During my father's recovery, which stretched over several weeks, I found myself navigating between two worlds more consciously than ever before. In the morning, I'd be at the hospital, bringing my mother coffee and sitting with my father during his physical therapy sessions. In the afternoon, I'd return to work, managing client projects and building my business. In the evenings, I'd attend charity events or business dinners with Ethan, playing the role of the supportive wife in Seattle's social circles. The juggling act was exhausting, but it also gave me a new perspective on what wealth could actually accomplish when used thoughtfully. One evening, after a particularly long day at the hospital, I came home to find Ethan in his study, surrounded by financial documents and medical bills. "What are you working on?" I asked. "I've been thinking about your father's situation," he said, looking up from his laptop. "His insurance covered the surgery, but the rehabilitation costs are going to be significant, and I started wondering how many other families are dealing with similar situations." He turned his screen toward me, showing a detailed proposal for a medical assistance fund specifically designed to help working families cover the gap between insurance coverage and actual medical costs. "I want to start this foundation in your father's name," he continued. "Not because he needs the recognition, but because his situation opened my eyes to a problem I'd never really considered before." Looking at the proposal, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't charity for charity's sake, or a tax write-off disguised as philanthropy. This was a genuine response to a real problem that had touched our family personally. "How much are you thinking of funding it with?" I asked. "Initially, $5 million. But Madison, I want you to run it." I stared at him. "What?" "You understand both worlds. You know what it's like to worry about money, and you've learned how to navigate wealth responsibly. You have the business skills to make sure the money is used effectively, and you have the personal experience to understand what families are really going through." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Running a foundation would mean stepping fully into the role of a philanthropist, something I'd been avoiding because it felt too closely tied to my identity as Ethan's wife. But this felt different. This felt like something I could own completely. "I'll need to maintain Tora's design studio," I said carefully. "I don't want to give up my own work." "Of course. Think of the foundation as an expansion of what you're already doing, using your skills to help organizations that are making a difference." Over the next 6 months, while my father recovered and gradually returned to work, I found myself building something entirely new. The Crawford Family Medical Assistance Foundation started small, with just me, an administrator, and a simple application process for families who needed help with medical expenses. The first family we helped was a young couple whose daughter needed specialized treatment for a rare genetic condition. Their insurance covered the basic care, but the experimental therapy that offered her the best chance required traveling to a research hospital in Boston and staying there for 3 months. Meeting them in my office, I'd moved the foundation into a larger space adjacent to my design studio, I saw my own family's fear and uncertainty reflected in their faces. But I also saw something else. Hope that someone understood their situation and was willing to help without judgment. "We're not looking for charity," the father said carefully. "We just need a bridge to get through this." "That's exactly what we're here for," I replied, and meant it completely. Within the first year, the foundation had helped 43 families and had a waiting list of potential recipients. But more importantly, it had given me a sense of purpose. That felt entirely my own. The unexpected consequence of running the foundation was how it changed my relationship with Seattle's social scene. Instead of being the billionaire's wife who showed up to events and wrote checks, I became someone who could speak knowledgeably about healthcare policy, medical debt, and the gaps in the American healthcare system. At a fundraising gala for a different medical charity, I found myself in a conversation with a group of other foundation directors. For the first time since my wedding, I wasn't introduced as Ethan Crawford's wife. I was Madison Crawford, executive director of the Crawford Family Medical Assistance Foundation. "Your work is getting a lot of attention," said Dr. Patricia Williams, who ran a foundation focused on pediatric research. "I've been hearing about your direct assistance model from families we work with. It's filling a real need." The conversation that followed was about strategy, impact measurement, and policy advocacy. I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd developed expertise in an area I cared deeply about. When I got home that night, Ethan was waiting up for me, working on his laptop in our bedroom. "How was the gala?" he asked. "Different," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Good difference. For the first time at one of these events, I felt like I belonged there because of what I bring to the table, not because of who I'm married to." "You've always belonged anywhere you chose to be," he said, closing his laptop and giving me his full attention. "But I'm glad you're starting to see what everyone else sees." The foundation work also brought unexpected healing to my relationship with my family. My mother, who had initially been suspicious of Ethan's wealth, became one of the foundation's most enthusiastic supporters. She started volunteering in our office, helping with paperwork and serving as a liaison to Spanish-speaking families who needed assistance. "I was wrong about you two," she admitted to me one afternoon as we were reviewing applications. "I thought the money would change you, make you forget where you came from. Instead, you figured out how to use it to help people like us, i.e." Father's recovery had been complete, and he'd returned to his construction work with a new appreciation for health insurance and medical advocacy. But the experience had changed him too. He started referring families he met through work to our foundation, becoming an unofficial ambassador for our services. "You know what I'm proudest of?" he said during a family dinner at our house, the first time my parents had felt comfortable eating in our formal dining room. "I'm not proud that you married rich. I'm proud that you figured out how to be rich responsibly." 3 years after starting the foundation, we'd helped over 200 families and had expanded to include a policy advocacy component. I was testifying before the state legislature about healthcare coverage gaps, speaking at medical conferences about patient advocacy, and consulting with other foundations about direct assistance models. The work was demanding and sometimes heartbreaking. Not every family we tried to help had a happy ending, but it was also the most meaningful thing I'd ever done professionally. One evening, as I was reviewing grant applications in my home office, Ethan knocked on the door. "Busy?" he asked. "Always, but never too busy for you," I said, looking up from my paperwork. "I have something for you," he said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a letter from the Seattle Foundation, informing me that I'd been selected as their Philanthropist of the Year. The award wasn't for the amount of money we'd distributed, but for the innovation of our approach and the measurable impact we'd had on the community. "They want to honor you at their annual gala next month," Ethan said, watching my face as I read the letter. I looked up at him, feeling overwhelmed. "This isn't because I'm married to you?" "Madison, this is entirely because of who you are and what you've accomplished." You've built something important, something that's making a real difference in people's lives. That's all you. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I reflected on how far we'd come from that coffee shop meeting 5 years earlier. The woman who'd been afraid of losing herself in someone else's wealth had instead found a way to use that wealth to become more herself than she'd ever been before. Do you ever regret it? I asked Ethan in the darkness. Marrying someone who turned your quiet life into a constant project? He laughed softly. Madison, you didn't disrupt my quiet life. You gave my life meaning. Before you, I was just a rich guy writing checks to feel better about having money. Now I'm part of something that actually matters. The next morning, I woke up to find a note from Ethan on my bedside table. They said you'd never get married. They were wrong about that. But what they really got wrong was thinking that marriage would be the most extraordinary thing you'd do. Love, your very proud husband. 5 years after our wedding, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror holding a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines, my hands shaking slightly as I processed what this meant for our carefully constructed life. Ethan was in London on business, and I had planned to wait until he returned to share the news. But as I sat in our kitchen that morning, staring at the positive test, I couldn't contain my excitement. I called him despite the time difference. Madison? Is everything okay? It's 3 a.m. here. I'm pregnant, I said, unable to keep the smile out of my voice. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then I heard him take a shaky breath. Are you sure? 3 tests sure, I laughed, tears streaming down my face. Ethan, we're going to be parents. I'm coming home, he said immediately. I'll catch the next flight. You don't have to. Madison, I'm not missing another second of this. I'll be home tomorrow. The pregnancy announcement to our families revealed just how much our relationships had evolved over the years. My mother's first reaction wasn't worry about money or lifestyle changes. It was pure joy about becoming a grandmother. Carmen immediately started planning a baby shower and offering to share her collection of parenting books. But the most touching response came from my father, who pulled me aside during a family dinner and said, Mija, this baby is going to have something I never could give you, the freedom to become whoever they want to be, without worrying about money. That's a gift. The pregnancy also brought new challenges I hadn't anticipated. The media attention that had finally died down suddenly resurged with headlines like "Billionaire baby on the way," and speculation about inheritance, trust funds, and the child's future role in Ethan's business empire. They're treating our baby like a stock option, I complained to Ethan after reading a particularly invasive article that included financial projections about our child's potential inheritance. Then we make sure our kid never reads that garbage, he replied firmly. Madison, we can't control what strangers write about our family, but we can control how we raise our child. We spent hours discussing how to give our child a normal childhood despite abnormal circumstances. We talked about public versus private schools, about teaching financial responsibility, about ensuring our child understood the value of work and the importance of contributing to society. I want them to have what I had, I said during one of these late-night conversations. I want them to know what it feels like to earn something, to work for a goal, to understand that nothing is handed to you just because you exist. But I also want them to have what I never had, Ethan added, the security to take risks, to pursue their passions without worrying about basic needs, to use their advantages to help others. 8 months into the pregnancy, we faced our first real test as expectant parents. A tabloid published a story claiming that we were planning to raise our child in isolation to hide them from the public eye. The article included quotes from anonymous sources claiming we were building a compound and hiring military-level security for the baby. The truth was much more mundane. We'd installed a security system and hired a part-time nanny who'd been recommended by friends. But the story snowballed, with parenting experts weighing in on child development and social media debating whether wealthy parents had a right to privacy. This is exactly what I was afraid of, I said, reading comment after comment from strangers who felt entitled to opinions about our parenting choices. Our child isn't even born yet, and people are already judging every decision we make. That's when Ethan made a decision that surprised me. He called a press conference, something he'd never done in all the years of media speculation about our relationship. "My wife and I are expecting our first child," he said, standing behind a podium in his office building's conference room. "We're excited, we're nervous, and we're committed to raising this child with the values of kindness, responsibility, and service to others. That's all the public needs to know about our family. This will be the last time I address personal speculation." In the media, the statement was brief, dignified, and final. Most news outlets respected the boundary he'd drawn, and the invasive coverage largely stopped. Our daughter Elena was born on a rainy Tuesday morning in March, 7 pounds and 3 ounces of perfect, healthy baby. Holding her for the first time, I understood what my father had meant about gifts. This little girl would grow up with opportunities I'd never dreamed of, but she'd also face challenges I'd never had to navigate. The first few months of parenthood were a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and the overwhelming love that comes with caring for a tiny human being. But they were also months of watching Ethan transform into someone I'd never seen before. The man who commanded board meetings and managed billion-dollar investments would spend hours making silly faces to get Elena to smile. He installed a changing station in his home office so he could take care of her during conference calls. He read her stock reports as bedtime stories, using different voices for market trends. "You know she can't understand you, right?" I said. One evening, finding him giving Elena a detailed explanation of quarterly earnings while she gurgled contentedly in his arms. "She's learning the sound of my voice," he replied seriously. "And she should know what Daddy does for work." When Elena was 6 months old, we made our first major decision about her public life. The Seattle Children's Hospital, the same organization where I'd felt reduced to my husband's bank account years earlier, invited us to their annual fundraising gala. They wanted to honor the foundation's work and specifically requested that we bring Elena to introduce her as part of the next generation of Seattle philanthropists. My initial reaction was absolutely not. I didn't want my 6-month-old daughter turned into a photo opportunity or used as a symbol for fundraising purposes. But then I thought about the children who would benefit from the money raised that night, and about the message we'd send if we appeared to be hiding our daughter from public service. "What if we go, but we set very clear boundaries?" I suggested to Ethan. "Brief appearance, no interviews, no photos with other people's children, and we leave on our schedule, not theirs." The gala was Elena's public debut, and it was both everything I'd feared and better than I'd hoped. Yes, there were photographers and reporters, and yes, people were curious about the billionaire's baby. But there were also genuine conversations about the foundation's work, meaningful connections with other families who'd been helped by our programs, and a sense that we were modeling how to use privilege responsibly. The moment that meant the most to me came when Dr. Patricia Williams, the Pediatric Research Foundation director I'd met years earlier, approached us near the end of the evening. "Madison, I wanted to tell you something," she said, looking down at Elena sleeping peacefully in my arms despite the surrounding noise. 5 years ago, when you first started attending these events, I wondered if you'd just be another society wife going through the motions. Watching you build the Medical Assistance Foundation, seeing the real impact you've changed how a lot of us think about direct service philanthropy." She paused, then added, "And seeing you here tonight with your daughter, not hiding from your circumstances, but not flaunting them either. You're showing all of us how to raise the next generation of people who'll inherit wealth and responsibility." As we drove home that night, Elena asleep in her car seat and the city lights reflecting off Elliott Bay, I thought about the woman I'd been 5 years earlier, afraid of losing herself, convinced that marrying Ethan would mean giving up her identity and independence. "Do you remember," I said to Ethan, "when you asked me what I was afraid of about your money?" "You said you were afraid of becoming someone you didn't recognize," he replied. "I was so wrong about what the real danger was," I continued. "I thought money would change me into someone shallow and entitled. I never considered that it might change me into someone with more responsibility, more opportunities to help others, more ways to make a meaningful impact." "Money doesn't change people," Ethan said quietly. "It just amplifies who they already are. You were always someone who cared about others, who worked hard, who wanted to make a difference. The money just gave you more tools to do those things." Now, as I write this story, Elena is 2 years old and already showing signs of her own strong personality. She's curious about everything, fearless in exploring her world, and somehow manages to charm everyone she meets, from the security guards at Ethan's office to the volunteers at the foundation. Last week, she helped me pack care packages for families we're assisting, carefully placing teddy bears into boxes with the concentration of someone handling precious cargo. She doesn't understand that the toys are going to children whose parents can't afford them right now. She just knows that we're sending hugs to kids who need them. That's the childhood I want for her. One where helping others is so natural. It doesn't feel like charity, where privilege comes with automatic responsibility, where using your advantages to lift others up is just what you do. People still occasionally ask me if I ever regret marrying Ethan, if I ever wonder what my life would have been like if I'd stayed in my small apartment, running my modest design business, worrying about monthly expenses like most people my age. The answer is complicated. I love that woman and her simple life, but I also love who I've become and what we've built together. I've learned that fairy tales aren't about finding someone who solves all your problems. They're about finding someone who makes you brave, enough to solve problems you never knew you could tackle. When Elena is old enough to understand this story, I'll tell her that the real magic wasn't in marrying someone wealthy. It was in discovering that love, real love, doesn't change you into someone else. It gives you the courage to become more fully yourself than you ever thought possible. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it gives you the resources to make sure other people get that same chance. By the time Elena turned 3, our family had settled into rhythms that felt both extraordinary and completely normal. Mornings began with Elena helping me prepare breakfast while Ethan reviewed international market reports, occasionally interrupted by our daughter's demands that he explain why numbers on screens were important when there were pancakes to be eaten. The foundation had grown beyond anything I'd initially imagined. We now employed 12 full-time staff members and had expanded our reach to include emergency housing assistance and educational support for families dealing with medical crises. What started as a way to help families bridge insurance gaps had evolved into a comprehensive support system. One particularly memorable case involved the Morrison family. Their teenage son Jake had been diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer that required treatment at a specialized facility in Houston. The family lived in a small town outside Seattle, where the father worked as a mechanic and the mother taught elementary school. "We've never asked for help before," Mrs. Morrison said during our initial meeting, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the insurance will only cover 60% of the treatment, and we'd have to relocate to Houston for 8 months. We've already mortgaged the house twice." What struck me about their situation wasn't just the financial burden, but the complete upheaval of their family life. Jake's younger sister would have to change schools. Both parents would need to take extended leave from work, and they'd be living in a city where they knew no one. "Let's solve this piece by piece," I told them. "The foundation can cover the medical expenses insurance won't handle, but I think we can do more than that." Working with our expanded team, we arranged temporary housing near the treatment facility, enrolled Jake's sister in a local school that specialized in supporting families dealing with medical challenges, and connected the parents with a support group for families in similar situations. 8 months later, Jake was in remission, and the family was back home. But the experience had taught me something crucial about how we could use our resources more effectively. It wasn't enough to just write checks. We needed to address the complete disruption that medical crises create in families' lives. This realization led to the next evolution of our work. We partnered with 3 major hospitals to create family support centers that provided not just financial assistance, but practical help with housing, childcare, transportation, and emotional support. "You're not just filling gaps in the healthcare system anymore," observed Dr. Sarah Chen, who joined our advisory board the previous year. "You're creating an entirely new model for how families can be supported through medical crises." The work was deeply satisfying, but it also highlighted the enormous scope of need that existed. For every family we helped, there were dozens more facing similar challenges without support. The more successful our programs became, the more aware I became of how much more there was to do. Elena, meanwhile, was developing her own understanding of our family's unusual circumstances. At 3, she knew that some families needed help, and that we were among the people who could provide it. She'd started asking to come with me to the foundation office, where she'd work at a small desk we'd set up for her, drawing pictures for families we were helping. "Mama, why do some kids not have money for doctors?" she asked one afternoon, as we were driving home from the office. I'd been dreading this question, knowing it would be the first of many difficult conversations about inequality, privilege, and responsibility. "Well, sweetheart, not all families have the same amount of money. Some have more, some have less. The families with more should help the families with less, especially when someone is sick. Like how Daddy has lots of money and we help people? Exactly. Like that. When I grow up, will I help people too?" "You can help people now," I said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "And yes, when you grow up, you'll have choices about how to use whatever advantages you have to help others." These conversations became more frequent and more complex as Elena grew older. By the time she was 4, she was asking about homelessness after seeing people living on the streets, wondering why some children couldn't afford toys when her playroom was full of them, and trying to understand why her family lived in such a big house when other families lived in apartments or shelters. Ethan and I spent countless hours discussing how to answer these questions honestly without overwhelming her. With the weight of social responsibility at such a young age, we wanted her to understand privilege without feeling guilty about it, to develop empathy without becoming paralyzed by the enormity of need in the world. Our approach evolved into what we called age-appropriate activism. Elena participated in foundation activities that were suitable for a child, packing care packages, drawing pictures for families we served, accompanying us to non-formal events where she could meet some of the children we'd helped. One of the most powerful experiences came when Elena was 5, and we were invited to the graduation party of a young woman named Maria Santos. Maria had been 15 when her family first contacted our foundation. Her mother had been diagnosed with cervical cancer, and the family was facing both medical bills and loss of income since her mother couldn't continue her house cleaning work during treatment. We'd helped with medical expenses, but Maria's story had stayed with me because of her own resilience. Despite the chaos in her family life, she'd maintained excellent grades and talked about wanting to become a nurse. The foundation had expanded its support to include a college scholarship program, and Maria was one of our first recipients at IABIA. Her graduation party, held in the community center of her neighborhood, Elena was initially overwhelmed by being one of the few English speakers in a room full of Spanish conversation and music. But Maria took Elena under her wing, teaching her simple Spanish phrases and explaining how she was going to study nursing so she could help sick people get better. "She's like you, Mama," Elena said on the drive home. "She helps people who are sick." "Yes, but she's going to help in a different way than I do," I explained. "Maria will take care of people directly, as a nurse. I help families pay for the care they need. Both kinds of help are important." "Can I be a nurse like Maria?" "You can be anything you want to be, sweetheart. The important thing is that whatever you choose to do, you use it to help make the world a little bit better." These experiences were shaping Elena into someone I was proud to call my daughter, but they were also creating new challenges for our family. As Elena started school, we had to navigate questions about why she lived in a different kind of house than her classmates, why she had so many toys, why her parents' work involved traveling to other countries. We'd chosen a private school that emphasized social responsibility and global citizenship, hoping to find a community of families who shared our values. While this helped in many ways, it also meant Elena was surrounded by other children from wealthy families, some of whom had very different approaches to money and privilege. Marcus says his dad bought a yacht, and that makes them better than people without yachts, Elena announced one evening at dinner, clearly troubled by this conversation with a classmate. Ethan and I exchanged glances. This was exactly the kind of attitude we'd hoped to shield her from while still giving her access to excellent education and opportunities. "What do you think about what Marcus said?" I asked carefully. "I think it's silly," Elena replied. "Having a boat doesn't make you better than other people. Being nice to people makes you better." "That's exactly right," Ethan said. "Having money means you have more choices about how to live, but it doesn't make you more important than anyone else." These conversations led to family rules about wealth and values. We established traditions like volunteering together at local organizations, donating toys before birthdays and holidays to make room for new ones, and talking openly about money as a tool rather than a measure of worth. By Elena's 6th birthday, she was actively involved in planning her own party, insisting that instead of gifts, guests should bring donations for the children's hospital. The party itself was held at our house, but Elena had requested that we invite not just her school friends, but also some of the families from the foundation who had children her age. Watching 6-year-olds from vastly different economic backgrounds play together in our backyard, sharing cake and laughing at the same jokes, I realized we were accomplishing something important. Elena was learning that friendship and fun had nothing to do with how much money your parents had, and her privileged classmates were discovering the same thing. "This is the best party ever," declared Sophia, whose family we'd helped when her brother needed surgery the previous year. "Elena has the most amazing swing set. Want to see my room?" Elena asked a group of mixed children, leading them inside with the unconscious generosity of someone who'd been taught that sharing was natural. Later, as we cleaned up paper plates and leftover birthday cake, I reflected on how different this celebration was from the anxiety-filled social events of my early marriage. There was no posturing, no competition, no underlying tension about who belonged where. Just children being children and families connecting over the simple joy of celebrating together. "You know what I love about today?" Ethan said as we watched. "Elena show her new friend Sophia how to braid friendship bracelets." "What's that?" Elena didn't think twice about inviting everyone she wanted to invite. To her, it was obvious that her friends from different parts of her life should all celebrate together. "She's going to be better at navigating all this than we ever were," I said, watching our daughter's easy confidence with people from all backgrounds. "She's had better teachers," he replied, pulling me closer as we stood in our kitchen, surrounded by the happy chaos of a successful party. As I write this final chapter, Elena is 7 years old and just lost her first tooth. She carefully placed it under her pillow, but not before asking if the tooth fairy pays the same amount to all children, or if some kids get more money because their parents have more money. "The tooth fairy is very fair," I assured her. "She gives the same amount to every child, regardless of how much money their family has." "Good," Elena said solemnly. "That's how it should be." These moments remind me daily that the most important legacy we can leave isn't financial. It's the values we instill and the example we set. Elena will inherit wealth and privilege, but more importantly, she's inheriting a framework for using those advantages responsibly. Looking back on the journey from that first coffee shop meeting to this moment, I'm amazed by how wrong everyone's predictions were. The people who said I'd never get married were obviously incorrect, but so were the people who assumed that marrying someone wealthy would fundamentally change who I was. The truth is more complex and more beautiful than anyone imagined. Marriage didn't change me. It gave me the security and support to become more authentically myself than I'd ever been before. Wealth didn't corrupt my values. It gave me the tools to live those values on a larger scale. Having a child didn't limit my impact. It motivated me to create a better world for her and all children to inherit. The fairy tale ending isn't that we lived happily ever after in material comfort. It's that we learned to use our good fortune to create more good fortune for others, and that we're raising a daughter who understands that privilege comes with responsibility, that wealth is a tool for service, and that the most meaningful life is one dedicated to lifting others up. When Elena is old enough to read this story, I hope she'll understand that the real magic wasn't in the circumstances we found ourselves in, but in the choices we made about how to respond to those circumstances. And I hope she'll continue making choices that honor both the advantages she's been given and the people who helped make those advantages possible. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.